Today we're going to finish the book of Joshua. We've already introduced Joshua as the general of Israel, the new leader who was leading into the battle. They were successful in the Battle of Jericho. And they were successful not because they had a great battle strategy or a battle plan. They were successful because God was with them. And that's going to be true about the rest of the conquest. You might have read in chapter 7 about Achan. It's not all going to be perfect. Some of the Israelites are going to make some mistakes. Even Joshua is going to make some mistakes that you can read about in Joshua 9 and 10 with the Gibeonite deception. But overall, the entire war is going to be won by Joshua, and we're going to find that out pretty quick. But we're not going to look at this anymore as Israel's conquest. We're going to look at it as Israel's inheritance. And we're going to dig into why that is. The word inheritance is found over 50 times in these chapters. The Israelites are not winning battles because of their strategies, because of how amazing they are at defeating their enemy. They're winning battles because God is with them, and God is giving them the land. You see, an inheritance is not something that you earn. An inheritance is something that you receive because of whose child you are. Which is interesting because there's not a whole lot of father-son language in the Old Testament. Most of that comes through Jesus in the New Testament. But the idea of having a father that gives to you and blesses you is certainly there. And that's what the inheritance is. It's a blessing and a gift from God. He's fulfilling the promise that he made to Abraham. As they move through the land, they were wiping out the Canaanite population. Again, not because they were Canaanites. They were wiping them out because of their idolatry and sexual immorality and the way they treated other people. People are tempted to call Joshua a book of war or military success, but the reality is it's God giving them this new land. It's easy to see when you think about how they prepared for the Battle of Jericho. God was preparing them through Passover and through circumcision. Both of those things were to set them apart and for them to demonstrate holiness. And that's what they were in turn to do as they moved through and established God's kingdom in the land of Canaan. Joshua's success ultimately came from his trust in the Lord. He won the entire war. There were still going to be battles and things to be had, and we're going to talk a little bit about how that process worked. But through the victories at Jericho and Ai, and then Hatzor and a few other main cities, the Israelites effectively defeated the Canaanites. We're going to talk a little bit about how they divided up the land. You can see here, and this is a map that's actually also found in your Bibles, at least something similar to it. And this is how all 12 tribes are being divided up. Now, if you count, there are 12 pieces of land, and you will not find the inheritance for Levi, because Levi didn't have an inheritance because of his actions in Genesis. However, the Levites do have a role, and that's that they're the priests. And so they're going to be spread among all of their other tribes and doing God's work in each of their lands. There's another interesting case because Levi wasn't alone in that sin with the story of Dinah. Simeon was not to receive an inheritance of his own. And you may notice that Simeon's inheritance happens to be in the land of Judah. So they do not get an inheritance of their own. They are essentially swallowed up by Judah. And so as far as land goes, that's how it's all divided out. Now, as they're moving through the land, Caleb, who is one of the descendants of Judah, makes a faithful request. And his faithful request is similar to that of Joshua. You see, even though the war had been won, there were still Canaanites living in the area. And it was the job of the Israelites to get rid of the Canaanites. Now, again, in some cases, yes, that's going to mean an actual battle. In other cases, it may be driving them out and away from their land if they choose not to become a part of Israel, if they choose not to know Yahweh and be a part of this. And so Caleb makes a faithful request that says, I want this land. He actually asks for it for a birthday present. If you remember, Caleb was Joshua's partner spy when they went into the land of Israel. And he said, give me this land. Even though there's a strong enemy there, I know that the Lord will be with me. And that can be found in Joshua 14. Now, it also includes a story about Ephraim and Manasseh, who are Joseph's sons and two of the largest tribes. Both of those groups of people decided that they deserved more land. And so they went and they asked Joshua. And Joshua responds in chapter 16 and 17 by saying, you can have more land, but you have to go and conquer the Canaanites. Now, if you read into how Ephraim and Manasseh respond, they actually have a very different attitude than Caleb. While Caleb says, I know the Lord has given me this land, and they trust in God, Ephraim and Manasseh did not have faith, and they were weak. They thought they were entitled to the land and wanted to be given to them, but they didn't want to go up and work for it. They actually complained that their enemies had chariots and that they were going to be difficult to defeat. But you can see how different that is from the way Caleb said, I know that God will be with me, even though I'm facing a strong enemy. Joshua did the same with Jericho, but Ephraim and Manasseh were weak. And this is going to be an unfortunate omen for the rest of Israel as we move through into the next era. At the end of Joshua, he makes a charge to the leaders in chapter 24, verses 14 and 15. What he says is, put your idols behind you, which apparently they still had issues with idolatry. They've had several generations. If you look at Matthew chapter 6, Jesus says, you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve an idol made of material things and Yahweh. In the same way, you can't serve God and money. One of them is going to take precedence in your life. And so Joshua is encouraging the Israelites. And as he's encouraging them, he does something that has happened before with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. It is the promise. And so they reaffirm the promise. If you obey my commands, then you will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now, if you look at what kind of covenant this is, if you is a condition. And so with a conditional covenant, you can end up having consequences. In this case, if they don't listen to God, and if they don't obey his commands, which number one command is you shall have no other gods, then they will lose their inheritance. Joshua closes out his speech with something kind of famous. This is actually on a lot of Christian door knockers. This is actually on, like, my home had a little door knocker that had this on it. So it's pretty common. It says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. it's not really specifically referring to a house as in a physical home, but it's talking about house of people, and that Joshua's people were going to serve the Lord and he was going to teach them. And hopefully, when he taught them, they would all Shema. Now we're moving on from the book of Joshua into the book of Judges, and we will see what the Israelites do with their inheritance.